I want to share with you a really cool technique that I've discovered for the Quilter's Rule nested squares. I bought these at the Quilters Unlimited quilt show in Northern Virginia last week at the Quilters Rule booth. I bought them specifically because I needed a 7.5-inch square ruler for squaring up some blocks. Everybody sells a 4.5-inch, a 6.5-inch, an 8.5-inch, but nobody seems to sell a 7.5-inch, which I guess shouldn't have surprised me. The only place I could find a 7.5-inch square ruler was at Quilter's Rule in this set of 11 that runs, as it says, from 1.5 inches to 11.5 inches, and the entire set retails for $25. Here is just the 7.5-inch square on its own. I'm trying to keep it moving because since it's clear acrylic, it doesn't really show up unless the light can catch the edges. It came with a white decal on the back from processing, but I removed that. Now, the way you would traditionally use any sort of squaring up ruler is to put it on your block, line up either your center or your diagonals. In this case, since this is essentially an hourglass block with the X seams through the center, I'm lining it up with the laser scored line that they've very conveniently put in the corner. If this were a 4-patch block, I could line up the score line here. So I've lined it up with my seams and it's looking pretty good, but the problem with just using it on its own as a window here, which would also be very handy for fussy cutting, but my center is kind of poofing up. It's hard to see in the video here, but it's not laying completely flat, which would make me think that if I rotary cut around this, I would end up with a block that was actually slightly larger than 7.5 inches from that tenting in the middle. So what I did was I took the remaining nesting squares from 1.5 inches up to 6.5 inches, the ones that fit inside this when they nest. And you can see here I haven't removed the decal from this, but what I have done is tape them together with masking tape, and obviously this would work after the decal's removed. I just haven't bothered to do that yet because I haven't used any of these other squares yet. So I taped them together so that they can all hold together as one unit, and once I've got my 7.5-inch square centered on my block, then I can just drop the remaining nesting squares into the middle. Takes a little bit of doing because they are machined very precisely so that they fit. But once I've got that locked in there, now that holds my center down and I can rotary cut around my square with no worries that it's off. So I have my 7.5-inch square centered on my seams. I have my remaining nesting squares tightly nested in there. And so now I can just rotary cut around the edges as usual. I'm using a rotating mat to make this whole process easier, but you can do this by using a smaller mat on your cutting surface and just flipping the mat. I made sure that nothing shifted. The other advantage to having the center filled like this is that not only does it keep my fabric from poofing up in the center, but it also means I've got a lot more stability for my hands. I'm not trying to balance my fingers on that little 1/2-inch strip of acrylic, which would make it a lot easier to accidentally put the tip of one of your fingers in the path of your rotary blade. But now I can remove my square, remove my center nested squares, and I've got my block cut exactly to 7.5 inches the way I want it. And I didn't have to have anything custom cut. As I said, this would also be extremely useful for any size of fussy cutting to put inside a square, because with this window it'd be really easy to center a fabric motif in there. Quilter's Rule also makes one that's cut on the full inch, so it goes, I believe, from 2 inches to 12 inches, but I think for most quilting purposes, having it with your 1/4-inch seam allowance already built in, the ones that are cut on the 1/2 inch are overall going to be more useful. But already with just this one project, I think this is definitely worth the purchase price. And I just wanted to share that.